of people were killed. I mean, it's unbelievable. And I want to make another comment. It is not only the Holocaust that is the earmark of what happened in Germany, in Europe during the war. The Germans, my wife and I later were able to visit Auschwitz, which is where a lot of the gassing took place. Over 1 million Jews were killed there. I want to talk about Auschwitz for a minute. I hope you get to visit it one of these days. One of the things that impressed my wife and me when we were there was that European countries are bringing all their young people, are coming there as part of their social studies classes. And the day we were at Auschwitz, there must have been 5,000 or 6,000 kids from the Scandinavian countries were there that day. But what I want to talk about in Auschwitz, I have learned that what the Germans were planning at Auschwitz was unbelievable. After they had learned how to gas people efficiently, their next plan at Auschwitz was to plan to kill 30 million Poles, to clean out Poland of its Polish people and put ethnic Germans into Poland. That was their idea. That's what was stopped by by our victory. I mean, people ought to realize that that was a tremendous victory for Western civilization, and people also ought to realize that the Germans came very close to winning the war. They came very, very close. You ought to read a lot about it. You ought to study a lot about it. There are a lot of good films about it, a lot of good books about it, a lot of good, and we are learning more every day because a lot of the memoirs, diaries, letters are still being revealed. So we're learning a great deal more every day. And the more we learn, we can't quite believe how bad it was. It's amazing that human beings behave that way. And I hope that you get a chance to visit it, see what it was. It's unbelievable. There were I will make a bet that by the time the war ended, there must have been 20 to 30 million people killed in Europe. The bombings, the war itself, the forced killings. And Germany absolutely raped Europe. Let me give you another memory of the war for me. After we were captured in the Battle of Bulge, we did a lot of walking around Germany. I mean, we were walking from point A to point B to point C, and in every little town or every city that we came to, there were thousands of young people from all over Europe who had been brought to Germany as slave laborers. So there were hundreds of thousands of young people your age, a little older, 16, 17, 18, 19, who were being forced to repair railroads, repair tracks, repair buildings, carry things, move things. It was unbelievable. Europe was literally raped during the war by the Germans. It was horrendous. And the Allied victory stopped that. If there had been no victory, that would have gone on and on. And the Germans were developing weapons that were going to start terrorizing the world. I mean, the rockets were already being fired toward the end of the war. But there are many things to talk about the war, but the best way you can learn about it is really read some very good, there are some terrific histories to read about World War II, really, just terrific. And the American effort was fantastic. And we had to use every resource at our disposal to win both against Germany, against Japan. They were two separate big, big wars. The numbers in Europe were way bigger. I mean, just the armies were on a scale of hundreds of thousands. And in the Pacific, it was violent and fierce, believe me. But you would have, instead of, for example, the Battle of the Bulge, on both sides of that conflict at that time, there were 1 million people involved. Now, a battle in the Pacific would have encompassed about 100,000 people. So the scale is equally fierce. Don't believe me, it was equally fierce. But the scale in numbers is just beyond belief. And then, of course, the end of the war brings nuclear bombing. And that's something that the world is still going to have to learn how to deal with. Too many countries have access now to nuclear bombs, and I hope they don't get dropped. Any other questions?
No. Is there anything else you want to share about any other personal experiences?
Well, yeah, I'm going to say a sweet experience, okay? On the day I was called into active duty, our group was called in, and we were signed in at an office downtown Cleveland and marched over to the Union Terminal to get on a train. And on that day, Penny and her twin sister Ruth were downtown Cleveland for some purpose, and they had learned that our group was being called into service that day. They knew some of the people. I did not know them. And at that train station that day is when Grandma and I met. So that was a terrific day.
Can you say something like you came back and you went to go see her and she was out on a date?
And she was what?
She was out on a date?
Well, no. The true story is that her mother was always sort of a mother hen, as mothers tend to be with young women. And no, we were apart most of the time after we met. We were apart almost 3 years. But later, after I got back from Europe, I was stationed at the Army Ground Forces Center in Miami, Florida. And on VJ Day is the day that the Japanese surrendered. That's August 14th, 1945. It's a very exciting day because all of us, we were sort of under the gun, anticipating that we would be sent to the Pacific to be involved in the invasion of Japan. And they were anticipating horrendous casualties for that invasion. The atom bomb was dropped on August 6th and August 8th. And August 14th, the Japanese surrendered. And that meant that we had survived the war. Truthfully, that was the first time since I went into service that I felt that I had survived the war. And later that day, I went to dinner with some friends in Miami Beach. And later that day, I decided to call Penny. And her mother, again, it was sort of a mother-hen kind of protection. And I answered the phone and asked if Penny was there. And I let her know calling, and her response to me was, Penny is out with a very nice young man. That's a true story.
But she wasn't really out.
Yes, she was out. No, she was out. But it was being emphasized that as opposed to the guy on the telephone, she was out with a very nice young man.